be starting with an introduction to the Canadian tide and current tables, and then we'll look at tide reference port calculations. So we'll begin by just showing you the different volumes that are available for tide calculations. The Canadian Hydrographic Service has put out 7 different volumes, and here on the West Coast we have 3 of those, 5, 6, and 7. And the one that we're going to be looking at is volume 6, and it looks at the West Coast and kind of the northeast coast of Vancouver Island, which you can see here. And then volumes 5 and 7 are up here. So I just want to talk a little bit about the way that the tide moves around Vancouver Island. So if you think about the big tidal bulge of water kind of moving around the Pacific, and it's influenced by the gravitational pull of the moon and the sun, and we'll get to that a little bit later. This tidal bulge floods north, so it moves in a northerly direction around the west coast here. And then as it approaches Vancouver Island, it sees one if you go west, and it actually, some water will come around here and start moving in this direction. And then the majority of the water will keep moving north, and then a lot of it will continue on its way north, but then some will come down here through Queen Charlotte Strait. And so you do get these two currents kind of meeting up in the Campbell River area. But I want you to think about as this tidal bulge moves north, that would be the tide coming in. We would see a vertical movement of water. We call that the flood. And if you think about it, as this tidal bulge moves in this direction, Tofino would get a high tide before Winter Harbor would. So you can think about the tide moving up north, and with it, the high tide is moving up. And then the ebb, or tide falling, moves south in a southerly direction. So that when it is coming in, we call that the flood, and then retreating is the ebb. And if you can think about the tide being the vertical movement of water, and then the current being the horizontal movement of water, that's going to help us out a lot later. So in this book, it looks at both tide and current calculations, and they are different, especially on the inside of Vancouver Island when you have the water kind of pushing through these constrictions. So if we look here at this table, reference ports are circles and current stations are squares. But to continue, we are going to be looking at tide tables. So in the next page, it's broken down to all these reference ports. So if you look at these, they are all the ones that are circles. Here, reference ports. So each one has its own little section, and if you were to open up to Tofino, page 46, then it looks like this. And so each month is broken down into every day, and they put a new book out every year, so it is different. So if we look at this, it's in Pacific Standard Time, so these numbers are not calculated for daylight savings. So typically in the summer or in guiding season, you are going to have to add an hour, and in the winter months, you can use these specific times. So if we were going to look at a calculation for Tofino, which is our reference port, and January 16th, we'd look at January and then 16th. So we can see here we've zoomed in, and in the left-hand column, this is going to be our high or our low tides, the time that it's occurring, and we would call this the turn. And then on the right, we've got the heights, so either in meters or feet. And you'll notice that these are alternating, so low, high. And this is because we have a mixed semi-diurnal tide cycle, and that means that we have 2 highs and 2 lows every day, and that those heights will not be the same. So you'll have a higher high and a lower low, and then 2 in between. And so if we were to just write this in our book, we would take the times here, and the most important thing to know is, are we within daylight savings? So January is not, and so we do not have to add an hour, so you can actually just take these times and put them directly into your book. And because our calculations that we do later on are all in meters, then we're going to use these numbers. I know that some people like to use feet, but unfortunately when you're doing the calculations, it has to be in meters, and so we'll stick with that. So I have another example, Alert Bay. If you were to open up your book and go to the Alert Bay page for July, you would see this. So the reason we're looking at this is July is within daylight savings time. And so do we add an hour? Yes. So when we're putting these into our book, you'll notice that we have added an hour to all of these times, and then the heights would stay the same. And you can see here that there's high, low, and because we're mixed semi-diurnal here, means there's 2 highs and 2 lows.